bore Jonathan and Noreen because they just already heard this story. I was staying in, for reasons that are too stupid and boring to get into, I'm staying in Secaucus. And this morning, I was coming in to meet a friend of mine around noon, and I missed the Jersey Transit bus, and the next one wasn't coming for half an hour, it was late, and there was a woman waiting with me, and this little minibus stops, and she gets on, and I said, "Porter Farm?" And he said, "Yeah," and I get on, and there's this weird liquid sloshing around the floor of the minibus, and it has this odd smell, and it's not urine, it's not anything human, so I'm not terrifically worried about it. It smells vaguely a little bit like the ocean, and then it takes on this kind of increasingly nasty smell, and I realize I'm on the local, and it's making every single stop, and the little minibus is completely full. And eventually I realized that there is smoke in the bus, and the bus driver stops and says, "Everybody off, we're getting on another bus." And the bus had, the liquid on the bus, on the floor, had caught something electrical in the back of the bus on fire. And so we got off and got onto another minibus, and I realized as I got off it was antifreeze, and God knows that death by burning antifreeze would probably be, you know, I don't know anybody that's happened to. But anyway, I got off and I thought, I should use that. And a lot of this book, Rake, comes out of that. Well, my first book, The Ice Harvest, the opening scene comes from a time I was waiting for a haircut. The barber was a friend of mine. He said, "Man, I'm running late. Why don't you go get a beer?" So I went around the corner, got a beer, or I was trying to get a beer. The only two people in the place were the bartender and a guy sitting at the bar, really, really drunk, with a cigarette and a lot of pomade in his hair, and his head, and she was kind of ignoring me on the phone, the bartender, and his head drifted down until it started, another smoke story, it started smoldering. and she turned around, noticed him, patted his hair out, took away his cigarettes and his matches and his ashtray, and gave him another drink. And I remember having that same thought. I think, I need to use that. And it took me a long time to get around to writing it. But this book, Rake, ended up being made up of a series of exaggerated true stories. I was living in France in 1989, and I had a couple of friends, more than a couple. I had one really close friend who was in the cast of a soap opera called Santa Barbara, which was, nobody watched it in America. It was a very, very unpopular soap opera, but it was hugely popular in Europe. So a bunch of them decided, while they were on hiatus, they had some episodes in the can, they said, let's go to Europe. And let's go to France and learn how to speak French. Maybe we can do some movie work over there. So I, did some legwork and rented them a villa in this town where they were going to learn French, which none of them really ever did very proficiently. But the one member of the cast who was a good friend of mine and still is, decided that we should write a movie together. And so we came up with the idea of a couple of guys who find the arms of the Venus de Milo. And which seemed to me like, it wasn't my idea, but it seemed brilliant to me until years later I found out that Ed Wood had the same idea back in the 60s. But we tried to get this movie made. We wrote a movie that I'm really grateful never got made, because it was the first screenplay I ever tried to write, and it was really a piece of crap. But we were going around, and this guy had enough cachet in France at the time, because the show was running in prime time, and it was the #1 show in its time slot, and everybody watched it. And so we got some interest, and among the people we had interested in investing were an arms merchant whose daughter wanted to be an actress. In the novel, I made her his wife, But this guy was very, very scary, and I was terrified of him. And I said to my friend, you know, I don't know how I feel about taking this arms money and, you know, making this dopey movie out of it. And he said, well, but, you know, we're going to take that bad money, the evil money, and we're going to use it to make art and turn it into good money. And I was so desperate at that time that I thought, yeah, okay, I can live with that. Yeah. So anyway, we had all these weird things that happened. The movie never got made. But about 3 years ago, my French editor called me and said, do you want to do a novel for a series of books that I'm doing? They have to be set in Paris. They have to be thrillers. And they have to be things that could be filmed cheaply, because we're going to take these 13 novels and turn them into 13 TV movies. Do you want to write one? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So I thought about it, and I thought, well, what if I took this weird story about us trying to make this horrible, stupid movie and turned it into a crime story? What if I turned my friend into a psychopath? So I called him on the phone and said, you know, you remember when we were trying to make that stupid movie? Would you mind if I made you a psycho killer? And he said, no, absolutely not. So I took this guy and I made him an ex-special forces guy with some severe psychological problems and a penchant for violence. And basically I told the story of us trying to make the movie. And so anyway, the story had to have Friday the 13th in it. So which was another of the conditions, because all the stories had some connection to Friday the 13th. And I'm trying to find the page where this starts. Okay. He has just had a date with one of his girlfriends who is a porn star. In real life, she wasn't a porn star. In real life, she was a Playmate of the Year. But I thought porn star was funnier and more interesting. Yeah, Playmate was not bad. Yeah, that's you know, kind of big stuff. I'm sorry. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, all right. So he drops the porn star off at her hotel. The occasional passerby, he's walking home, and by the way, the dialogue here is all supposed to be in French, and it's very foul, and I used to run into a lot of kind of roving bands of junkies in Paris. I don't know if they're still there. I think there's probably fewer than there used to be, but there would always be, you know, a group of male junkies, and there would always be a woman among them, and she would always be trying to goad them on. And I have no idea why this was, but maybe some of them were just drunk, but I remember them being really kind of an interesting particular phenomenon. And this is one of the sections of the book that is not based on anything that really happened. So, the occasional passerby stopped and called out to me, to which I returned a snappy salute, and at Châtelet one old lady stopped to lecture me about my character's love life. "That's pretty, nurse. Why do you treat her that way? She should be making you babies. There's more to life than making love to strange women, doctor." He's a doctor. I thanked her, promised to consider it, and was on my way. I decided to walk along the river and descended to the Quai du Louvre. As I crossed beneath the Pont du Carrousel, I heard someone snicker from the shadows, followed by more snickering from several individuals, followed by a suggestion that some cocksucker be killed for his shit. Sensing that I was the cocksucker in question, I reached into my vest pocket and removed my tactical baton. He's really he's kind of one of these guys who just always has a tactical baton or something. He's just a lunatic. "Excuse me, sir, you dropped something," came a voice from behind me. I spun and faced a guy in his 20s carrying a blade with no idea how to use it offensively. From beneath the bridge came 4 of his comrades, at least one of them a girl, judging from the giggling. Our fabulous his wallet and the watch, and that way you can get fucked up. Goodness gracious me, I said, the joyful adrenaline flowing through my veins and counteracting the pacifying effect of the oysters and wine in my belly. Want my phone too? Forget I want your phone, bitch. Hands fuck over. I flicked the baton under and over and hit his hand, and the knife went flying into the river with a satisfying plosive splash. Before he'd fully processed its loss, I cracked him across the teeth and kicked him hard in the balls, and he went down to the paving stones howling. His friends hesitated, and then the girl said, "You let him kick Renee's ass like that, bitch?" At that, one of them charged me, a large fellow with a stupid look on his face, at least as far as I could tell in the dim light of the K. He was open for one of the real textbook moves in judo, so I telescoped the baton, and just before impact, replaced it in my jacket pocket. I bent down, stepped lightly aside, and altered his trajectory over my shoulder and down the stones of the embankment, and then down into the Seine to join his friend's blade. Parenthetical. I used to hear that if you fell into the Seine, they automatically hospitalized you and gave you a serious heavy-duty course of antibiotics. Is that still true? Was it ever? Or is it just one of those things they tell young American exchange students to discourage them from diving into the river? Close parentheses. Au suivant, I yelled, and 2 of them turned and ran. The girl stumbled forward. Fucking faggots, afraid some fucking bitch. Come on, let's get it on. She too had a knife, and like her friend, she was holding it all wrong. The baton didn't seem sporting, fighting a girl, so I waited until she was close and starting to lunge, and then I planted my right fist in her belly, as hard as I'd ever hit anyone, male or female. Something about it felt wrong, though, and when she hit the ground, I saw that she was pregnant. I took the knife, which had fallen from her hand, and threw it in the river, and then I climbed the steps to the bridge and crossed it. I walked some distance trying to find a payphone. There's the curse of the cell phone. Never a payphone around when you want to make a call that can't be traced to you later. And finally found one by going the wrong direction, just off the Place Saint-Michel. I called the SAMU, the emergency service, and informed them that a young woman was lying unconscious beneath the Pont du Carrousel and that she seemed to be pregnant. And then I hung up. On the way home, I heard the ambulance's klaxon honking and wished the girl well despite it all. Mostly, I hoped I'd terminated that pregnancy, though inadvertently, if only the sake of the kid himself. I grew up with a mother like that, and buddy, that's not any way you want to grow up. Okay, this is Thursday, May 12th. My mom was married for the first time at 14, illegally, and divorced at 17. She had got her GED and started college, an experiment that produced nothing but a second marriage to the instructor of her freshman math course, which itself was the result of a pregnancy that began in the classic American manner in the backseat of a T-Bird. My father, with whom I maintained sporadic contact until his death, was overjoyed at the prospect of a child, but my mother didn't take to it. She found that what she liked was drinking and other fellows, and after the unpleasant surprise of my arrival, birth control. I do have one sister, 15 years my junior, from my mother's third marriage and brief flirtation with sobriety and Christianity. My stepfather, a good and honest, if somewhat stern Kentuckian, suffered through 5 years of her antics before divorcing her. I'm in somewhat spotty contact with him and my sister, though whether mother is still among the living is a matter of some indifference to me. Anyway, my discovery after my discharge that acting was something I was good at and that women liked was probably what saved me from a life of brawling and petty criminality. All that anger gets wrapped up in the preparation and chucked out in the performance. An art therapist once told me that all art is art therapy. Now, another of his girlfriends is Esme, who is wants to be an actress and is married to a very vicious French arms merchant. I was in bed telling all this to Esme. I spent the day wondering about the girl under the bridge and was rewarded in the late afternoon with an account on the Libération website about a group of young people who claimed they'd been beaten up by Dr. Crandall Taylor from the television. 2 of them had been hospitalized. There was no mention of a third, which either meant that the first boy hadn't been hurt very badly, or that the one I had tossed into the Seine had floated away. There was no mention of the girls being pregnant, which presumably meant she hadn't miscarried. My feelings were mixed there, but I'm not the Pope, and it wasn't my business to go around deciding who could or couldn't reproduce. Esme had shown up around 7. He's staying in an apartment that belongs to her husband. And we spent some time looking at the artwork before surrendering to the bedroom's pull. When we were done, I asked where the money had come from to buy all that artwork. Some of it's mine from modeling. You earned enough modeling to buy a Picasso. Oh, please, it's a little drawing. They're not giving those little drawings away. What does Claude do for a living anyway? This was the moment of truth. I didn't care if it was true or not. I just wanted to see if she'd tell me. He's in the import-export trade. Where is he now? I was thinking North Korea, Iran, Pakistan, Israel. I don't know. He doesn't tell me where he goes. Anyway, he won't be back for a week. Would he kill me if he knew? She snorted. Don't be melodramatic. But he doesn't like me, does he? Is he going to put up the money for the movie? She extended a long leg into the air and studied its perfection. I hate to say this, but I don't think he is. You say you've got money from modeling, enough to buy a little Picasso drawing. All right, he paid for that, but I picked it out. Isn't it your money too? Can't you insist? It's not that kind of marriage. I'm working on him. Don't despair. I'm not desperate yet. Tomorrow I'm going to go out to Longchamp and bet all I've got left in the world on a horse in the 5th. She took in a deep breath and sat up with a charming gesture of placing her hand flat on her sternum, taking my little joke quite seriously. You mustn't! Why not? Tomorrow is Friday the 13th. I laughed and thought to myself, maybe I would go to the track tomorrow for real. Esme left before midnight with a stern warning not to do anything the next day that required any sort of luck, and I went to sleep earlier than usual, convinced that my own luck was almost magically good and that no harm would come to me, little suspecting that downstairs was a man with a gun and a key to the apartment and a seething desire to see me dead. So, now it's Friday the 13th. It's maybe 2 or 3 a.m. when I awaken to the smell of Esme still clinging to the sheets and to the unmistakable sensation of someone's presence in the apartment. Esme left hours ago, and though the lights are out and I hear nothing but the sound of the air conditioner cycling, my instincts tell me I'm right. Sliding off the bed as quietly as I can, I crouch and try to remember where I put my telescoping baton. All right, I know, inside my inside sport jacket pocket, but where's the jacket? Too late for that anyway. Someone's standing in the doorway of the bedroom, and I don't know if he sees me or not. I'm next to an end table, and as quietly as possible, I run my hand over it, trying to remember whether there was anything on it that might be used as a weapon. My hand clasps something oblong, made of stone, weighing a good 2.5 kilos. I'm creeping toward the figure when a flash goes off, the sound of gunfire mostly muffled by a silencer. A moment later, my would-be killer flicks on the light switch and reveals himself. Claude Guiteau has come to do his own dirty work, using his own 2 hands. I'm almost proud of the old boy as I swing my blunt object down over his head. This all takes place in the split second he stands there puzzling over the fact that there's no corpse in the bed, just a bullet hole in the pillow. Once down, he's not completely out. The pistol's on the floor, though, and for a few slow moments he gazes in blurry puzzlement up at me. Then, to my relief, he passes out. I don't want to hit him again, having realized that I bludgeoned him with a very fine piece of antique jade, another blow to which might snap it. I set about restraining him and consider my options. What, for example, will happen if I call the cops? Scandal would lead to some really first-rate publicity, which would in no way harm my bankability. But with Claude in prison, our project would stall, maybe fatally. Kill him? Not here, not in his own apartment. It occurs to me that given his line of work, he might even have the kind of enemies who pay to see him dead, might even pay to hand it over alive in order to kill him themselves in some exquisitely horrible and painful manner. But having the man tortured to death seems unsporting. After all, this attempt on my life would have been instantaneous and quite possibly painless. had he succeeded. I dial Fred, as the screenwriter, whose business this is, whether he knows it or not, and tell him to come over immediately and to be discreet about it. Take a cab, get out a couple of blocks away, I tell him. You want to have a story meeting now at 3:15 in the morning? Not a story meeting, this is more of a finance meeting. By the time he arrives, I have poor Claude trussed up like a prize steer at a rodeo. In one unlocked drawer in the closet was a plentiful supply of ropes, gags, nipple clips, and so on, something I'll have to question Esme about at some future date. For the moment, however, they're perfect for restraining Claude, who has yet to regain consciousness. When Fred walks into the kitchen, he finds Claude unconscious and tightly bound to the chair with a bright sky blue ball gag stuffed in his mouth. Holy shit, Fred says. Yeah, you got any ideas for getting rid of him? Who is he? I'd forgotten Fred hadn't met him yet. Esme's husband. His voice rises. Our backer? He tried to kill me. What for? I guess he found out I was banging his old lady. God damn it! He raises his hands to his temples and spins around once in disbelief at my carelessness. Didn't I warn you not to do that? Shit, you think he's gonna put up the money now? I'd given that a fair amount of thought while preparing for Fred's arrival. He wasn't gonna put up any money now, that was for sure. That's what you're here for, Fred. You're the brains of the outfit. He stares at Claude for a minute, the cogs rolling in his head, and I feel a sudden burst of confidence in him. Whatever I've done, Fred's the guy who's going to make it better. Happy Friday the 13th, I tell him. I do have one small suggestion. I know a girl who has access to a meat locker. He thinks it over, seems to approve. He's a smart fellow, cautious, analytical, and if he approves of the idea, I feel certain it's a sound one. Maybe I think I'm home free. Maybe the curse of the calendar did its damage to Claude rather than to me. I am, after all, a member of a superstitious profession. We are avoiders of black cats and hats left on the bed and broken mirrors. Perhaps the gods of superstition have rewarded me for all my years of fidelity. Or maybe I'm fucked. Anyway, this is by far the most improbable, exaggerated, and the least realistic book I've written. And the funny thing is, it's the book that has the most true stuff in it. The Meat Locker is a real place, and actually went and filmed a short documentary because my editor didn't believe that it was a real place. And it's a building I worked in 1981 and 82 in Paris, and it's a dormitory for women. And you're all literary types, so you know Sylvia Beach. Sylvia Beach spent a good part of World War II living there, hiding from after the Nazis took over Shakespeare. But there's this abandoned kitchen beneath the cafeteria, and it hasn't been used since World War II. And I used to manage this cafeteria, and we stored all our stuff down there. I was always scared shitless of this place. And when I wrote the scene where, you know, they've got this guy and they have to figure out what to do with him and they can't kill him, and I thought, wow, I know what I'd do with him. I'd go over to the foyer and put him in the meat locker. So anyway, a lot of this stuff is just exaggerated. There's a Vietnam War themed nightclub in this book, and you know, they have dancers in tiger cages, and this was a real place. This was across the street from a bookstore that a friend of mine owned, and they were very keen on him coming over with all of his friends, and we went over the first night it was open, and it was like, holy shit, they've really, and it was kind of, there was kind of a POW thing, and it was just, it was so badly conceived that, you know, and again, that's one of those things I just, someday maybe I can use this. Yeah.
When you say this book is the most preposterous in many ways, did you, was there something about getting the assignment to do this book that allowed you in your mind to write, let's say, a more preposterous over the top?
the book or the story?
A little bit, yeah. And the notion that it had to be fairly short. It couldn't be, you know, a really long. I had just finished a kind of a shortish crime novel called The Adjustment, and my instinct was to, you know, go and write a nice long, you know, complicated literary book, and this came up, and I thought, okay, well, I've got all these little weird stories from that one period. And when I called my friend, he said, can I play myself in the TV movie? And I said, yeah, as far as I know. And I asked the people who were doing the TV movie, and they said, yeah, sure, I don't care. And then, of course, they paid me very little money, this French publisher, for this book. This was originally came out in France before it came out in the US. They paid me very little money for it, but the idea was, well, it's going to be a TV movie, so you'll make money that way. And so about a year and a half ago, they copped to it and said, yeah, we're going to do 3 of the 13, and probably not going to do the others. So, yeah.
Not the whole time. After about a third of your way through your reading, I was thinking this would be a really good graphic novel. Have you ever thought about doing something like that?
I would love to do it as a graphic novel. I guess the problem is finding a publisher, but yeah, I would love to do it as a graphic novel. I used to, back in this same period when I was trying to write a book and failing and writing this miserable script. One of the things I was doing was I was doing a weekly comic, and it was a one-page thing, and it got published in a few kind of giveaway music papers, and I got tired of doing it. But yeah, I would love to see it as a graphic novel.
How did you approach writing the novel to make it suitable for a TV movie?
Well, mostly that was a question of repeating locations, because you don't want to write something that's got 40 different locations. If they're going to do a low-budget TV movie, you want to do something where, you know, if we're filming at the Center for Fiction, you know, we use this room, and then we have another scene in this room, and then we have a scene in the morning in this room, because those sorts of things, because I was thinking about adapting it, and I adapted a novel called The Long Home by a wonderful Tennessee writer named William Gay, and my writing partner and I, every time we would take out one of his things, I felt awful. Every time there just wasn't room for something he'd written, or we figured, well, we have to combine these 2 locations because it'll be too expensive. I just felt like I betrayed him horribly. And every time I used every time I took out one of his lines, I just felt like, oh my God, I'm just a monster. And every time I put in a line of my own that wasn't there in the book, I also felt like, oh my God, I am a traitor to literature. I'm a monster. I can't believe this. And the funny thing is that was exactly the opposite thing. The opposite of what happened when my book was adapted, because my book was adapted by Robert Benton and Richard Russo, which is about, you know, that's really good. I mean, that's you know, I'm not complaining. But when I first read the script, I was like, well, they didn't write that. That's my line. That's my and if they put in something that wasn't mine, well, that's not the book. But I was very keenly aware of these things as I was writing the book. I was thinking about, is this something that if I'm adapting it, I'll have to take out? And things like the scene that I just read, Under the Bridge, those are good. You know, that's a good thing for a movie. That's a good thing for a script. It's also a thing that can be cut out fairly easily. And so the fact that the movie isn't happening bothers me only from a financial perspective, because I'm very happy with the book, and you know, I'm happy that it stands as a book. But
were you? Because it sounds like you were very conscious of things that you had to pay attention to in terms of adaptation. And was that a kind of overall structure that helped you speed through the book, let's say, or was it something that you had to kind of deal with and make it harder, or do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you get an assignment and the assignment makes it easier to write as opposed to harder. So
yes, absolutely, because there were things I knew I couldn't do, and I write without any aim. It just happens because I assume it's not going to be made into a movie, and so I just write any damn thing I please without any sympathy or regard for the person who might eventually adapt it. But in this case, I was going to adapt it myself, and so I thought, well, I don't want to make myself any problems. So.
Oh, you write. Someone else. Well, I think it's going to follow that up. They were expecting you to adapt it into.
Yeah, I mean that was the idea that me and my writing partner and I would do the adaptation, and which is interesting because it was for French TV, and my writing partner does not speak a word of French. He can't say yes or no or hello. So it was going to be a thing where we would hash out the story together, and I would.
Were you going to have a narrator for the film?
I hadn't really thought that
There
far.
seemed to be a lot of internal dialogue there.
There is a lot of internal.
Scenes that you read.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know more than that.
Well, I did have an idea that there might be some breaking of the fourth wall and talking to the camera. And that would have been something I would have discussed with the director had there ever been a director. But it's also plot heavy enough that it could go without it.
It has a lot of humor in it, though, it seems to
Yeah, it's meant to
me.
be.
Kind of dark.
Yeah, it's meant to be funny.
So that kind of thing might work with
Yeah.
the main character
Yeah.
kind of talk to the audience.
And that was my thing. The one thing that kind of made me think that would not work now was I watched and liked very much House of Cards with Kevin Spacey, which I'd seen originally, and there was a British version of it, which also had the talking to the audience divide. And I really liked that, but I think now it might seem imitative because this character, this actor, the real guy, as an actor, he's got a lot of Spacey's kind of. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say pomposity, but sort of a formal snicker.
But, it might be fun to have the different characters to picture off. That they would kind of
Yeah.
appear.
Yeah.
Realistic.
Yeah. And almost all the characters in this book were based on somebody real and exaggerated.
Because I'm trying to put my hand up, but because you also did movie work and screenwriting work, so do you have? I mean, you sort of answered it before, but do you have that in your mind somewhat in terms of? I mean, the screenwriting, the skeletal quality of screenwriting is great. I always think substructure for a novel in many ways. But do you go back and forth in thinking that way as you write?
It can be, but I should note that my first published novel was The Ice Harvest, which I wrote after a really bad experience writing a movie that I really ended up hating. And I had written a novel that wasn't very good, and then I wrote some screenplays that weren't very good, and then I got hired to write a screenplay that I thought could be really good, and any number of things resulted in its not being a very good movie. It was a really unpleasant experience, and I just thought, screw it. Going back to fiction, I'm just going to write a book that I want to write, and a book that I would want to read. And I really, at that point, wasn't thinking. If I had been thinking of it as a movie, because I had been writing really bad screenplays, if I had been thinking of it as something that would be adapted, I think it probably wouldn't have been very good. And I kind of thought of it as unadaptable. But then people pointed out to me that no, it wasn't.
So the first novel, before the Ice Harvest, you never published. Is that true?
No, never published it. Never will. Bad, bad, bad.
What elements made you think it was unadaptable? You know, what made it was adapted, but what made you think that?
The fact that it was, that so much of it was internal in the narrator's head, and there was so much, a lot of what I thought was crucial to it were his memories and his thoughts about, you know, growing up as a member of his particular generation in Kansas in a rural environment, and then ending up as a sleazy, crooked lawyer, and, you know, farm boy turned sleazy, crooked lawyer, and I just, it didn't bother me that I thought it was unadaptable. It kind of pleased me. The notion was just, I'm going to write one of these short little crime books that I like to read. So.
To say in front of that, when he does want to get out in Asphalt,
Yeah.
which is the most endearing thing about it all, is like striving to get out. I wanted to ask if it's not on the back burner, what the literary novel project might have been that you were considering before you.
It's a book that
Something still.
yeah, it's a book that's still gonna happen. It's a book about, it's set in Hollywood around the start of the American entry into World War I. And it features Bill Ogden, who is the narrator of my third book, which takes place in the 1870s and 1890s. And my book that's going to come out next is that same character in the 1880s, which I skipped in that book. So just back and forth with the same. And these characters are all related to each other, which is, I've actually started doing a family tree of how they're all related. And a lot of it's, you know, some of it's incestuous because there are people who don't know that they're cousins, because this guy, Bill Ogden, has so many illegitimate, you know, great-grandchildren. But yeah, they're all kind of related to each other. And some of it hasn't come out in fiction yet. It's just, but I know who they are, and I know who.
Is it meant to be a Hollywood, both a Hollywood story, or just happen to be
well,
things that
yeah. No, it's meant to be America at the beginning of World War I. I mean, Hollywood is in it, and I find that period very interesting. I find kind of the lower echelons really interesting. I find people who were doing craft work and people who had been photographers and studio photographers and you know, all kinds of other things were suddenly finding work. And I was a little bit inspired by Emmett Dalton and Wyatt Earp, who kind of burnished their reputations a little bit by coming to Hollywood and saying, well, yeah, I'll tell you how it was. And I like the idea of Bill doing that. And also, I've written a story that I don't know if I'm ever going to publish. I need to change it, but one of Bill's great-great-grandchildren ends up with Bill's mummy, because in 1935, he sells the right to display his body, because he's sort of a notorious gunslinger by that point, even though he never was. In reality, he never was, but he manages to convince people that he was. And yeah, and they make a movie out of the Bender story, which is the story of the novel Cottonwood. And so this guy who runs this kind of dime museum says, hey, I'll pay you $500 if you'll let me pump you up with arsenic and display your body. And so, you know, it's 2000 and this place has been long closed, and his great-great-grandson comes in and says, what am I going to do with this?
Can I ask you a
Yeah.
question? Because you talked about when you wrote The Ice Harvest that you wanted to write the kind of book that you liked, a small crime novel. Can you talk about that and that sort of genre and that history and what you were reading and why?
Well, when Barry Gifford started doing the Black Lizard Press, which is now owned by Vintage or Random House, but it was originally, he put out these thin little paperbacks, and they were just beautiful books, and he put out a lot of things like David Goodis and things that had been out of print and things that were forgotten. One of my favorite crime writers is Helen Nielsen, and you know, she was a fairly prolific writer, and she just wrote these great noir novels, just really bleak and just great. Very much, you know, I kind of think she's a forgotten peer of Highsmith, and that's how I discovered her books. And Dan J. Marlowe and Harry Whittington and Charles Willeford, and all these terrific books. And you know, I was reading them and thinking, you know, there's really something to these. These are fun, but they're kind of serious. And so I thought, you know, I'm going to write one, and I just want to write a book that I could read that I could read really fast. It had some humor in it and had a really bleak sort of a feel overall, despite it being funny. And I really honestly thought that maybe my French publisher, who I knew at the time, he published my panel, Jim Crumley, and I met him through him back in the early 90s. And so I thought, well, the Treat will publish this in France, and maybe I'll get a paperback edition here for, you know, maybe 1,000 copies. And I don't, you know, I didn't really, I wanted it to be in print, but I didn't care if a whole lot of people read it. And because I really didn't think that a whole lot of people liked this kind of stuff. And I was really surprised to find that, you know, when it was offered to them in a modern, you know, hardcover edition, you know, a thin crime book, as opposed to something on a spinner rack at the drugstore, people would buy it and take it seriously, which really surprised me. And I found that a lot of people like the same kinds of things that I do, which was a big surprise, because normally the stuff I like is just,
Woodwell's Salas's novels are just out. They're maybe
Yeah.
175 pages long each,
Mhm.
maybe. And
Yeah.
it's probably the best books either one has written.
Yeah,
The reviews
yeah.
are stacked. I'm just a fan
Mhm.
of that. The same way. I just caught up to Whitney just
Yeah.
2 weeks ago. I had no idea until I read it. The woman was on a prison farm or something trying to help.
Yeah,
It's unbelievable.
and a lot of these,
But Woodwell, you know, Woodwell and Salas, you know, Godheads, but these are 150-page book or whatever kind of.
right, oh, and I
They're
love
fabulous.
books. I also love big, thick books. I mean, I love Lahane's giant historical novels. I love those, you know, but I also, you know, I love a good book that clocks in at, you know, 50,000 words or less. I mean, I think if you do it right, there's a certain kind of novel that really doesn't need to be any longer than that. And maybe that's not even, now I've been told that Ice Harvest isn't properly a novel because it's only 50,000 words, but I think that's maybe close to the cutoff point.
50, 60,
Yeah.
that's a novel and some.
Yeah. Well, my novel Cottonwood was, you know, I was going for 800 pages, and my editor at Ballantine said, no, we're not putting out an 800-page book by you. So that's how this new book came out. I had the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, and only the 1870s and 1890s were crucial to this story because they tied in together. And, you know, I had, you know, about 30,000 words of, you know, middle stuff, and I decided to you know, bulk it up into a novel, which was interesting because it kind of was a self-contained story, but it needed to be longer, and it was interesting doing that without adding things that were just extraneous and filler.
You go wax into that somehow?
Yeah, a little bit.
I can understand that.
Well, also, you kind of have to, I had to go back and reread the first book because I really had to get back into this guy's voice. It's a very 19th century, a little stilted, a little bit, you know, I got that voice from Jack Black, who wrote You Can't Win. I don't know if any of you have ever read that, but if you're interested in 19th century low-life crime, this guy was a burglar and a pimp, and he rode the rails, and he ended up in San Francisco, and he he wrote this memoir, and this memoir is just terrific. I heard recently that Rose Wilder Lane helped him write it. I don't know if that's true, but it's going to be a movie. It's called You Can't Win, and if you, I imagine, I'm sure some of you have read it, but if you haven't, it's a really entertaining book.
Your last question
I have a question, nobody else does.
Okay.
You mentioned a couple of times that you have a writing partner.
That's for
Do you-
screenwriting.
Like for screenwriting?
That's just for screenwriting. I don't.
All your books you just write by yourself?
Yeah, I have known people who've written novels as a team, and I have no idea how that works. I just can't imagine how that works. But
If your name's James Patterson, it works.
yeah. Oh, I actually know somebody who works for James Patterson. I guess that's how, he outlines it and tells them what the story is, and then this guy writes it. But he's actually very generous to his ghostwriters, and he gives them credit. And pays
Well,
them.
they come up with the ideas a lot of times, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. But
Well,
yeah, I'm not sure how it works, but.
I had a last question. You sound, at least you present yourself as a very pragmatic writer, that you do the job, you sit down and do the job. And I was just
I
curious.
think I'm pretty artsy-fartsy, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so. You mean, all right, well, do you want to talk about that as opposed to the, more, let's say, you must have a kind of disciplined routine to do these, or is that not true either?
I have a disciplined routine when I'm hard at work on something. I was working on somebody, I was doing a thing for hire, a TV pilot for somebody, and not for somebody who was funded, it's just somebody who wanted me to doctor their script. And I was having trouble getting started, and finally he called me and said, I really, the guy who's backing this really wants it next week. And I said, oh, fine. I sat down and I cranked it out. Or if I'm working on a project of my own and I'm really anxious to get it done, I'm very, I'm pretty prolific, and but I think it's not that I'm disciplined. I think it's just because I like doing it. I mean, I enjoy, if I'm working on something that I really feel like it's good and I'm having fun writing it, then it's no problem sitting down and just cranking it out. And sometimes I find that I lose track of time, and I'm amazed that it's time to get up and leave.
So are you a more organic writer than someone like Jeffrey Deaver, who was here telling us about his many notebooks that he spends like 6 months to 8 months planning the book before he writes it?
No, I'm a seat in my pants kind of. Even with this one, and knowing that I was going to, hoping that I was going to adapt it, I really didn't know how it was going to end. And I usually don't. Jim Crumley told me something once. He would write about 100 pages of a novel, and he would suddenly realize, oh, I know how this ends. And he would just chuck it. And he completely lost interest if he knew what the ending was. Now, that's not the same as having an idea for how you might end it. But if you come to the conclusion that, oh no, I'm going to, the garage owner, he's going to shoot Gatsby, and Daisy's going to go back to Tom. Oh, that's the only way it can end. If you realize that early on, I don't, maybe Fitzgerald did it that way, but for a certain kind of writer, I mean, for Crumley, he said he had, drawers full of 100-page partial manuscripts that he just had no more interest in. And I'm not quite that way. I like to have a sense of where I'm going, but I also like to be able to surprise myself. And one of the reasons I never thought Ice Harvest would get adapted is because I thought, here's a novel with no plot. And people have pointed, and I don't think anything I ever write has a plot, and then people point out to me afterward that, no, that's got a plot, here's what happens. But I don't know why, I'm never very concerned about plot while I'm writing. I'm more concerned about character and incident and those kinds of things, and somehow the plot just follows those things. And if I were a better plotter, I probably would make a lot more money. Probably would.
Sorry, I'll sort of elaborate. Do you know what your friend meant, James, when James probably said that if he knows how it ends at page 100, he can't keep writing? Does that mean he can't find, how does he ever, at some point he must know. Do you know what I meant?
Right, yeah.
How does he have to find out?
Right.
Multiple options or?
I think there have to be multiple options. When I was writing Ice Harvest, there's a kind of a surprise ending to the Ice Harvest, and I was about halfway through writing it when I thought of it, and I thought, no, I can't do that. I really can't do that. But I had several other options, and I thought I can end it this way. And I got to the point, you know, I was probably 20, 30 pages from the end of the book. I thought I can end it this way, and I tried to write it, and it just didn't work. And I tried Plan B, and it just didn't work for me. And because it didn't work for the other characters, it didn't work for, you know. And I got to this point where I had this poor guy on the road leaving town, and I thought, this is the only ending I have left. And I tried it, and I gave it to my wife, and she said, oh my God. And I said, does it work? And she says, well, it works for me. I don't know if it's going to work for anybody else. But, and that kind of turned out, I think that was the thing that made people notice it, because it was a really, you know, it was a surprising ending. And it was kind of weird. But that was my safety school, I don't know, to put it in college terms, I guess. Really did not know what I was going to do. So.
Thank you. I wanted to just say, I wonder, can we get access to the old desk with Jim Crumley? So we can
Yeah, I don't know. You know, I haven't talked to his. You know, at one time he had an 800-page novel that he never finished. That there were multiple versions of it, and this 800. I think 800 pages is why I picked 800 pages out of the air a minute ago when I was talking about Cottonwood. But he was in a cabin with one of his wives, maybe number 3 or 4, and he was real drunk, and he was just tired of this damn thing, and he started throwing it in the fire. And this is in the days of typewriters, and he was throwing it in the fire. And she was, Jim, stop it, Jim. He said, no, I'm burning it. I'm done with it. And so he had to start over. And
it was probably shorter the next time.
I don't know. He published parts of it. A book called The Muddy Fork, and it's good. You know, what he published is good, but.
I think your friend Dwayne had people from last session read The Long Kiss. Was that right?
That's good kiss.
That's Good Kiss, which is really fun.
No, remember that church?
Right.
That church where that's good kiss. And most of these modern crime guys.
Yeah.
That's the book that told us that we could do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're one of those.
Yeah.
We're going to move Scott to that side of the room, to the book signing side of the room, and you can add to the shorter books if you'd like when you sign them. You can add another 10 or 20 pages.
Well, I don't know about 10 or 20, but I'll put a little postscript.
There you go. Right. Okay. Thank you. We're going to go over.